The fact of the matter is, and I have to tell you, I watched the Bill Maher segment this morning, and several times I had to just, take a breath because he's such an ignorant sack of shit. It just nauseates me when I'm listening to this. He hasn't a clue what the history is. He really doesn't know anything.
Yeah, dude, it really is pretty funny how Norm Finkelstein has just gone like full debate bro since this conflict in Israel and Palestine popped off. Let's take a look here. This is one that I flagged, just absolutely going off on Bill Maher and Ben Shapiro. So we can take a look here. He says, Bill Maher, in search of a nun, an undergraduate at Harvard, rang me up yesterday. He's trying to organize a debate on Gaza. The problem is no faculty at Harvard is willing to debate me. Imagine. Here I am, a lowly academic who couldn't even get tenure at a subpar college, yet everyone at Harvard is terrified of matching wits with me. It's quite the sight these days. The mighty Israeli Defense Forces shot dead in broad daylight, women taking refuge in a church, and bare-chested civilians carrying white flags. So brave. And then there are the cheerleaders here at home. Macho Ben Shapiro in his Top Gun Tom Cruise visors, cowering in a corner, pissing in his pants at the prospect of debating me. Oh God, what a legend.
Oh, he soldiers on. Lest I forget the little shit Bill Maher. Donning horn-rimmed glasses as if he's learned a scholar, not Joy Behar. The only difference being she reads the prepackaged factoids off of index cards and he's off of a teleprompter. Lately, Maher has been wowing his loser audience with his sweeping knowledge of the rise and fall of empires. Gee whiz, Maher. If you know so much, debating me should be like shooting fish in a barrel, so why not invite me on your program? If things get too rough, you can always steal a page from your heroic IDF and use a nun as a human shield. Holy shit. This dude went in. He was not holding back at all. Wow. Honestly, I love the energy. Might as well take it to these fuckers. Might as well be like, hey, man, you want to act like this is all about ideas? You'll debate anybody. Oh, anybody who challenges me is just a supporter of Hamas. Why don't we have Norman Finkelstein, who's famously, his parents survived the fucking Holocaust, or survived, or, I believe survived. Let me look, actually, because if they... I don't want to say something incorrect. This is the Vanguard after all, but we do have a little bit of both of his parents were Holocaust survivors.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
And pretty hard to be like, you don't care about the rise of anti-Semitism. Pretty hard to be like, you don't care about, Jewish issues. It's like, of course the dude's like concerned about that.
Let's take a look at some of this video. He was on Breaking Points the other day and was able to respond specifically to this Bill Maher clip. So I thought that would be worth watching at least a couple minutes of this.
Joined once again by Professor Norm Finkelstein. He is an author, he is an activist, he is a political scientist, author of many books, including Gaza, an Inquest into Martyrdom. Great to see you again, sir.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start with, I know there were a few interviews recently, including one that occurred on our program, that caught your interest and that contained some inaccuracies or claims that you thought were worth responding to. And so the first one that I wanted to get you to take a look at was a recent monologue from Bill Maher. Let's take a listen to a bit of that.
But eventually, everybody comes to an accommodation, except the Palestinians. Was it unjust that even a single Arab family was forced to move upon the founding of the Jewish state? Yes. But it's also not rare. And no one knows more about being pushed off land than the Jews, including being almost wholly kicked out of every Arab country they once lived in. Yes, TikTok fans, ethnic cleansing happens both ways. In Fiddler on the Roof, the family is always moving to stay one step ahead of the Cossacks, but they deal with it. When they're leaving Anatevka, they say, hey, it wasn't so great anyway. Nobody was a bigger colonizer than the Muslim army that swept out of the Arabian desert and took over much of the world in a single century. And they didn't do it by asking. There's a reason Saudi Arabia's flag is a sword. Arafat was offered 95% of the West Bank and said no. The Palestinian people should know your leaders and the useful idiots on college campuses who are their allies are not doing you any favors by keeping alive the river to the sea myth. I mean, where do you think Israel is going? Spoiler alert, nowhere.
So the sort of core of the point he is making is Jews got kicked out of a lot of countries too, and it's effectively time for Palestinians to get over it and move on.
Well, just as a general point, I find it rather amusing when I hear Bill Maher pontificating about, if you see the longer clip, about Byzantium, about the Roman Empire, about Muslim expansion. He knows as much about these topics as Joy Behar. The only difference between him and Ms. Behar is she reads her factoids off of index cards while he reads them off of a monitor. And neither of them is, in my opinion, particularly funny. And I find it in very poor taste in the midst of a genocide, making these rather impoverished attempts at humor, where half the audience laughing uproariously sounds as if they were paid to laugh. But let's leave all that aside. Let's get to the factual matters. Here are the facts. The Palestinians on the Zionist project, I'm not going to go through the whole history, I promise your listeners. The Zionist project begins roughly at the end of the 19th century. Their aim was to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. Palestine was not empty. It became obvious to the indigenous population that the realization of the Zionist enterprise to create a Jewish state would at minimum reduce them to second-class citizens in their own place of birth, or at worst, result in their expulsion. And the Zionist movement coined a locution they called a transfer. They didn't want to use the vulgar, gross term expulsion, so they called it the transfer. And as Israel's leading historian, who, by the way, at this point is extremely right-wing, his name is Benny Morris, and you'll see him in all the right-wing talk shows like Coleman Hughes and others. Benny Morris said, and now I'm quoting him, the idea of transfer or expulsion, the idea of transfer was inbuilt and inevitable in Zionism, okay? Now, it happens I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Zionism. I know about the subject, but I never belabored the terminology because sometimes I think it obfuscates the critical facts rather than enlightening them, sort of like nowadays when Palestinian supporters talk about settler colonialism. I don't find this kind of terminology enlightening. I think it obscures more than it enlightens. But as a factual matter, as Benny Morris said, the idea of transfer or expulsion was inbuilt and inevitable in Zionism. Okay? And so the indigenous population of Palestine, the Arab, later they came to define themselves as Palestinian, but the Arab-Palestinian population of Palestine naturally revolted against that prospect. In fact, Benny Morris writes, remember, he's now a right-wing historian, but Benny Morris writes that the driving force, the motor force of opposition to Zionism was the prospect that the indigenous population was going to be expelled if this idea were realized. Now, skipping far ahead and not to tilt the scale in my direction, but just to bring us to an end before this one question consumes your whole program. Come 1948, a war breaks out. I'm not going to talk about who's right and who's wrong in the course of the war, but now, as David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of the state of Israel, said, he quoted the famous French expression, which is still quoted, when in war, do as in war. Namely, here is a prospect. Now we have the opportunity to realize the Zionist dream. And the population from the area that became Israel, 90% of the population from the area that became Israel was expelled. Exactly what you would expect, given what the ideology was, and an opportunity now availed itself. And they became the Palestinian refugees. So now Bill Maher says, well, basically he says, it's a done deal, get over it. I'm not going to pass a judgment on that. Now, you know, Crystal, and if you don't mind, I'd rather look at you than I look at myself, because I'm more concerned about persuading you than persuading myself. I'm already persuaded. And body language is
Can we
something
pause it really quick?
indicative, so I'd like to look at you and Bryce.
It's interesting how he unpacks this. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that when Bill Maher kind of goes through his tirade, he talks about, yes, obviously it's very true that, you know, if you look at, you know, world history, there have been all kinds of examples of horrible behavior by human beings, just absolutely atrocious behavior, barbaric style behavior. And one of those examples of that is when, you know, many of the Arab and Muslim majority countries there was an expulsion of Jewish folk from those countries. That's like straight up, that's like undeniable, right? Like they put up the numbers in the clip. Nobody here is going to deny that was a reality. But I think it's interesting that he like points the blame back at the Arab countries. Say, look at how much they conquered of this part of the world. And no introspection to say, hey man, Gavin, I'm not sure what the number is off the top of my head, but don't we have like quite a few military bases around the world? Like I know we have a couple in America, but I think we've kind of spread out a little bit. I think that we've done some things like the Monroe Doctrine, right? Because after we got done ethnically cleansing all of the Native Americans and doing our manifest destiny, our sea to shining sea, if you will, we turned our sights on the rest of the fucking globe, right? So why not use us as an example of one of the chief wrongdoings, our original sin, as they say? Right? Why would we not stand in opposition to that as it's happening once more? Why would we not learn from our mistakes? And hey, guys, I believe in the Statue of Liberty, bro. I believe in the statue. I believe anywhere that people are persecuted, that they should be able to seek refuge in America. But what's fucking crazy to me is that none of these folks, the right wingers that are in love, or the people like Joe Biden who are so in love with creating a Jewish state, they didn't say, hey guys, why don't you just have California? Why don't you guys just have California? You make it a Jewish state. Make it you weren't willing to offer your land. You weren't willing to say, what? Let's go with Washington State. It's very beautiful. Very scenic. Good for all kinds of stuff over there. Why don't you have that one? It's a good chunk of land. Why don't you have that? You need a Jewish state. No, why wouldn't refugees be safe here in America? You know what I mean? It's like there's an absolute unwillingness to engage with that, to unpack the reality. Oh, they want to selectively look at the past, but they don't want to look at the whole packs. They don't want to look at the whole pie. They don't want to talk about that. Oh, you know who was occupying a lot of that land immediately after the scary Arabs with the sword that you made a big stink about? Oh, yeah, England. Yeah, sorry about that, but you fucking forgot that part. That 100 years wasn't convenient for you.
See, you're demurring, I'll stop and we'll continue. So he says basically get over it. Now, Crystal, let's say you were fired from a job wrongly. What do you expect your friends to do? Do you expect them to support you? Or do you expect them to say, Crystal, get over it?
I would hope they would support me.
Exactly. So there is an obligation, a kind of moral obligation among those not directly the victim to support those to the extent they're able to rectify a wrong. That's, to me, a moral responsibility. And then you might come to the conclusion, you know what, this is going nowhere. And I hope this person understands it's going nowhere and move on. Okay? The fact of the matter is, and I have to tell you, I watched the Bill Maher segment this morning, and several times I had to just, take a breath, because he's such an ignorant sack of shit. It just nauseates me when I'm listening to this. he hasn't a clue what the history is. He really doesn't know anything. This is the reason Bill Maher doesn't want kids to go to college. He says it's a waste of time. Yeah, in college you learn that before you speak your mind, you should actually know a few facts. You're supposed to read books, not just have note cards passed to you. So what are the facts?
Ooh, so that was the main part that I wanted to get to. Obviously, it's all worth listening to, but yeah, gotta love Norm Finkelstein mixing in with the more dry history and academic approach, some good old name calling, and yeah, I mean, absolutely,
the Vanguard.
honestly, yeah, but yeah, 100% second his opinion on Bill Maher. He is an ignoramus sack of shit, and yeah, he's also 100% correct to point out that he's no more credible or worth listening to than the likes of Joy Behar on The View. I'm not sure why people treat Bill Maher like he's some sort of an intellectual or, his ideas are genuinely worth engaging with. But for whatever reason, people act like he is this, serious political thinker, unlike just one of the Karens on The View or something, which is really where he belongs ideologically.